Well, good evening, everyone. Hi, how are you? Welcome back. Welcome back. Thank you. I'm Scott Nash. I'm the Executive Director of the Illustration Institute. This is Nancy Gibson Nash. She is the Programming Director of the Illustration Institute. And we're very pleased to invite you all to the first of our summer series of lectures and workshops that deal with the art of illustration. Just a little bit about Illustration Institute. I'll be quick here. We are a relatively new arts organization. We've been in existence for 2 years. This is our 3rd season. Our mission is to increase awareness and appreciation for the art of illustration and narrative arts. We are part school, part exhibitions, and part residency. We like to provide programming such as this to inform people about the art of illustration. We put on exhibitions. We've done a number of illustration-based exhibitions. And actually, libraries are our homes. It's the perfect natural home for us to be. Illustration and libraries go together. We've collaborated extensively with the Portland Public Library, bringing exhibitions like the Edward Gorey exhibition, Maurice Prendergast. Most recently, we did a Garth Williams exhibition at the Curtis Memorial Library in Brunswick. And this year's exhibition is one that I'm going to challenge you all to see. It's called The Art of Cute. Did you hear me? The Art of Cute. And I am going to challenge you all to see this one because I think it will challenge your notions about this aesthetic, which I think is often maligned and underappreciated. And I promise you, the aesthetic range that we've curated in this show it ranges from everything from the adorable to the deeply disturbing. And it's at the Brickstore Museum in Kennebunk, and it's going to be up. It began in May, and it will run through August. And so we hope, and I will challenge you all to go see this exhibition, which I think you will truly enjoy. I also wanted to thank the Portland Public Library for sponsoring this series. They've revamped this room. The Rhines Auditorium has got all sorts of new technology. Hopefully the sound qualities, you can all hear me, right? Everything's fine with that. And I just want to talk a little bit about our programming for this summer. I'm not going to go through the full list. We have cards that we'll make available for you, which has all of our programming and also our website information. But I just want to highlight 2 of the upcoming we have like 20 presentations and workshops during this summer. After Chris Raska, on July 1st, we have Mark Ulrickson, who is, I think, one of the most prolific New Yorker cover artists to date. He's done some very well-known New Yorker covers. You probably know him for his, most recently for a Martin Luther King cover where Martin is sitting within a cityscape. And he's done some exceedingly memorable works. I love his style. We would encourage you to come. That is on July 1st. And then on July 3rd, we have Katie Yamasaki. It turns out we're blessed with 2 children's book authors and illustrators that also do murals. And Katie does fantastic large-scale murals all throughout New York, in Chicago, and I'm hoping we can get her to do one here. We need more murals, I think, in Portland as well. And then one other program that I want to alert you to is that in September, we are doing a program of Fashion Illustration Week. It's a full week on the subject of fashion illustration. We will be having 2 fashion illustrators, one named Jenny Croik from the New York area and Bijou Carmen from LA. Along with those 2, we're going to have Alex Rowe, who will be teaching sort of the basic sort of techniques of fashion illustration, including croquis and sort of draping sort of ideas. And we also have a historian, Edward Mader, who's written an important work on the history of shoes. He will be giving a lecture on the history of fashion, and we're going to have a number of local fashion designers as well talking about the creation of fashion, from the drawings to the actual fashion. More information can be found on our website, which is illustrationinstitute.org. I did forget to mention that along with the exhibitions and the programming that we do, we also have established an artist residency that focuses on illustration and narrative arts. It's on Peaks Island in the Tolman Heights area, which is the northern part of the island. We have two residencies there, and we've just come very close enough to completing a 900 square foot studio that Chris and Lighty are hopefully going to utilize as they're actually our first artists in that space, and we're delighted to have them here. Now I want to introduce Chris Raska. Chris, yeah, I think most of you know Chris's work. Oh, I need to focus before I talk about this. One second. I also want to point out another program that I need to talk about is we also have another sponsored set of workshops, which is called Candlewick Workshops. Candlewick is, in my opinion, one of the finest publishers of children's books in the world. They are completely dedicated and committed to creating beautiful books. I can see some Candlewick authors here. Melissa Sweet is here, and of course Chris Raska has published with Candlewick as well. We're doing a full series of talks and workshops that are focused on the art of picture book. And again, I'll leave this with you. We have, this will be available. You can refer to this both on our website and at the desk where Ari from Longfellow Books is selling some of Chris's work, some of his books. We have, just quickly, we have Neela Viswani, who is a children's book artist who does, basically her illustration is photo illustration. We have Equa Holmes, who is a Coretta Scott King Award winner and Caldecott winner. And we have Juana Medina. We also have Sean Sheehy, who's who does pop-up books. So it's a full summer of programming along the lines of children's books. There you go. Thank you. So, Chris Raska. Chris is an amazing artist. We've been very fortunate to have him here in our very first year, and he's graciously come back to the residency. He's a multi-Caldecott medal winner and Caldecott honor winner for Yo Yes and Ball for Daisy. And he also won a Caldecott for Hello, Goodbye, Window. My favorite aspects of Chris's work is that he takes on subjects that are not typically associated with children's books. The first Chris Raska books that were in my collection were books about jazz artists. Charlie Parker Plays Bebop, a children's book that actually looks at the music and rhythms of Charlie Parker and tries to visualize it and tell in a very poetic way the story of Charlie Parker. Also in my collection is Mysterious Thelonious, where he created a picture book around the art of Thelonious Monk and the playful sort of art and improvisations of Thelonious Monk. And then also John Coltrane's Giant Steps. His works are poetic, musical, and expressive. I think he's one of the most extraordinary illustrators in this world of children's books. I'd like to introduce you now to Chris Raska. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott and Nancy, for that very lovely introduction. It is my pleasure to be here again in Portland and at Peaks Island. As you heard, I'm a children's book author and illustrator. I have been working in this world for almost 30 years. I've done many books, and it's not something I ever thought I would be doing, but it is what has become my career. And I live in New York City with my wife, Leidy. We were thrilled to be invited to be residents on Peaks Island again this morning. So beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous morning to wake up to, having come from New York last night. And just the birds and the sun, and it was so quiet. In fact, it was almost too quiet, which was why I was so pleased that the chainsaw started going off about 20 feet over our heads, and felt quite at home at that point. But watching the main chainsaws, I've watched chainsaws in Central Park before, and they go up the trees like they do, very exciting. The difference with the Mainers, I've decided, is they don't wear hard hats here. They just go up, trees falling down, no one has a helmet on, no big deal. So anyway, that was the excitement for the morning. But what I'd like to talk about today, and I'm going to try to answer a question tonight in the next 35 minutes or so. I'm not going to talk about my books so much. I'm going to talk about keeping journals, specifically travel journals. And the question that I'd like to answer is, why bother to keep a travel journal? That is the question. When I first started keeping a travel journal, well, I'll reel it back a little bit. My wife and I got married. We went into the Peace Corps, and I recall my father saying to me, "You will have a lot to draw. I'm sure you will see a lot to draw." And he was so right. That proved to be the case. Leidy and I worked in a children's home in the Caribbean, which was extremely stressful work, and it was 24/7 for days at a time, and then we'd get a day off. And in order to put ourselves back together, the two of us would go out and draw. And that was kind of the beginning, but that is, I'll get to that in a minute. But before I do, I will say probably why this it kind of comes into your head to keep a journal is because you've seen others do it. And so I'll start with the greats before I go on. This is Turner, James Mallord William Turner, who is one of the quintessential travel journalists. I've always loved his watercolors. He's known, of course, for his huge oil paintings, but he kept fantastic watercolors. And he kept journals all of his life, which he never showed anybody, or only a few people, and at his death bequeathed to I don't know if the Tate already existed, but he bequeathed all of his journals to England. And it turned out to be 300 journals. And I have a lovely big fat book that only shows images from each journal. And at first when I got it, I thought, well, this is nice to see all these. Then I realized one spread was for one journal. So he's thousands and thousands of these drawings, which is fantastic. This is from Henri Matisse's travel journal to Morocco. And I think this is quite interesting because it doesn't really look so much like Matisse. It looks like it could be almost anyone who Matisse is much better known for this kind of thing, which is also in those journals. And this is a favorite of mine, August Macke, a German painter who died quite young. He died as a 20-something in World War I. Maurice Prendergast, this is a facsimile of one of his complete journals. which I love, and David Hockney. This is his travel journal to China. Ludwig Bemelmans is the great children's illustrator who did Madeline and also adult books, and he was a fantastic keeper of sketches. This is, surprisingly enough, Edward Lear, who we know as a poet, but during his life he really supported himself by making travel journals and traveling about and creating them. And this is another English illustrator, favorite of mine, John Birmingham, who just passed away this February, who made many, many children's books, but began his career also in travel. And I didn't get an image, but I should have gotten an image of Charlotte Solomon, who is one of the great journalists of painted journals, though she, not so much travel journals, more personal journals. So these are the things that we were looking at, probably our inspiration, and I probably shouldn't have begun with the greats, because I'm going to now jump into my own. And as I was preparing this talk, I rummaged just to find, they were all out of order, to find my books. And this is the very first one. And this is from our time in the Caribbean. Looking at it, I remembered the thing about keeping a travel journal is when you buy the book, it's usually hard-bound, full of beautiful paper. And all it does, if you're me, is make you fearful, because you're going to ruin it, and it's going to be there forever. It's between hard covers, and it's going to look awful. So this journal, I began, and only about the first 10 pages are filled. But I did go back to it, and looking at this, this is the answer number. Well, in answering my question, why keep a travel journal, the first answer is because the masters did it. The second answer is because it can show you where you've been. So in this instance, I can see that I was in Milwaukee, and then I was in Ann Arbor, and I crossed various rivers, including the Pawpaw, the Kalamazoo, and I went through a number of interesting counties, including LaPorte, Berrien, Van Buren, Calhoun, Jackson, and Washtenaw. So this is another reason to keep a travel journal. We moved to New York, and as I discovered that the way to find out what pier you're at is simply subtract 40 from the number, and then that equals the cross street. So pier 90 is at 50th Street. Another thing to know. This is some summer state fair that we were at, I think. Now, when we moved to New York, before I got into children's books, my first job was making illustrations of anthropomorphized buildings. And so these are the drawings before they became anthropomorphized. I was also doing big paintings, word paintings I called them, where I did a drawing of some scene and then put some kind of word on it. In this case, I chose hum. It might have been buzz. But I was interested to look into this to discover that this was the very beginning of me considering doing jazz books. I had already done a dummy of the book that Scott mentioned, And here, someone told me to look up Rachel Isadora's Ben's Trumpet, which had existed, which I did not know. Then my travel journals kind of devolved into diaries, and you can see what I thought of my painting at that time. And here, this interests me because on the right-hand side, that is a summation of my trip to my family home when I used to call my lower back kind of my mother meter. So in as much as she was stressed, I could tell exactly how stressed my mother was by how bad my back hurt. So in this case, there was some tension. Though at the end of this, I see, you probably can't read it, but I did get the letter from Dick Jackson, who was my first editor, and he wrote in regard to my first book dummy that I sent to him, and he said he quite liked it, so it was fine after all. More. Now, the other reason as a kids' book illustrator to do journals is to just try to figure out how to paint and how to paint something you can use, which is very difficult because you don't want to look like anybody else. And none of these things I liked very much. One thing I've always tried to get away from is what is known as the contour line, the sort of the outline. And I've always, but here I'm still dealing with the contour line. And I was quite unhappy, more contour lines, which I don't care for. But finally, but I think travel does help, and this is the journal that I had when our son Ingo was born, and we had planned to go to Austria, where my mother is from. So we had already planned this before he was expected, so he was only 6 weeks old when we left. And this is my mother on the left, that's my father, and that's our son Ingo. And this was, I was starting to get to a place I liked better in terms of illustration. But still unclear. Now, the second answer for why to keep a travel journal is because it occurred to me as I was looking at this painting that while this does not look like much to anybody else, I remember quite exactly when I sat down in the woods and painted this, because I was just thinking, could this be a way to paint trees? And it doesn't look anything like the trees I was, well, it does to me, but it very much captures that moment for me then. And then I was trying this, don't like that. And then trying this is a little better. And then the next pictures that I did like came when we took our son Ingo to Rome for the first time when he was 4. And there was something about that trip that I loved so much. And one aspect of it was this, that we were traveling with friends who also had a 4-year-old, and so we were walking together quite a bit. So the question is, if you're a travel journal painter, how do you do it without being a jerk? So you can't just like sit down, start drawing and painting, and make everyone stop and wait for you, and draw attention to yourself. You somehow have to weave it into the day. So what I would do in this case, I had a little ink. I had a little pot of ink in my pocket, actually, and I would do these very quick painted images and then bring them home, and then the next morning I would add the color. And this proved to be my happiest way of working, which I worked for quite a while. This is in New Orleans. This is Kansas City. This is Washington State. So I think the having to have limited time, or the limitation of time, can actually be a lovely thing. This is Central Park, which I don't care for that much, but it's okay. This I put in because a few years then hence, my father passed away quite suddenly. And so I went to be with my mother. My father was a historian, and he wrote about Anabaptists, if you know who Anabaptists are. They were a radical pietist movement in Europe. And my parents lived on a mountain in Pennsylvania in a little house that they had built, and my father was very, very happy there. My mother was not happy there. It was very isolated. It's where a lot of those pictures of trees that I've just shown you were painted. But she, after he died so suddenly, she knew she would really, really be in a bad way if she stayed on that mountain. So I helped her move to a little house in the town not too far away. But we had to deal with all of my father's things. All of his books and his collections of books went to a special center for Anabaptist studies. But he had big stacks of handwritten notes on note cards. And my mother said, "Burn them." So I took them all out and just started burning all of these things. And at the last minute, I snuck this one out of the flames. Very difficult to do, but it's got to be done. Anyway, why do I mention this? Because I think it was somewhat traumatic, and my work after that suffered. Although this is from the little town that I moved my mother to, actually the town where I was born, Huntington, Pennsylvania. And this drawing I do like for its title, View from Dollar General Parking Lot. But my painting after that really got pretty awful for a while, until I went to Singapore I was invited just for a couple of days, and I just had 2 days in Singapore, and I raced all around that city-state, and it felt so much like, afterwards it felt like speed dating Asia, and I painted, and I like these paintings very much because for me, they capture that, just those 2 short days. And it kind of got me painting again, I have to say. Also, the flight there and back was fantastic. It was a flight that no longer exists, apparently. It was the longest commercial flight that has ever been offered. You left Newark on a Thursday. You got to Singapore on a Saturday. And when you came back, you left, when did you leave? I guess you left Monday, you watched 2 sunrises, and you landed on Monday. So it was a great flight. So after Singapore, I started painting more like the Singapore days, though not quite as well. That's in Chicago. It looks more or less like Chicago. That's back in the Alps. This is camping. This isn't too bad. And this is Michigan. This is the view from my studio, and a trip with my son's class to Costa Rica. Central Park, my favorite tree. A lake. So another question that I often ask myself is how closely to tie myself to what I'm looking at. Generally, even when you are painting a landscape and sitting in front of it, or painting a figure in figure drawing class, there's always an aspect of memory involved, even if it's the memory of looking and then looking at your page or your paper. You look and then you look at your paper, and so there has to be a memory there. And I like the idea of bringing memory more and more into the equation, which is partly why I like doing the quick drawings with my paint in my pocket, do them very quickly, and then the next day finishing them, because then your memory can come into play. You don't have to worry if you're getting the exact proper shade of green. It can be whatever color you want, really. Who's going to say? So in effort to develop this in myself, I decided to start trying to draw my own dreams, because then you are drawing from an image that only exists in your head, that has to somehow get from deep inside your head into your fingers, and it always comes out as it's materialized. It transforms from your own vision to this. Anyway, so for a time I was trying that in my travel sketchbook. So this is a dream. That's clearly my son Ingo. What's going on? I have no idea. It looks like someone carrying spears or surfboards, and they're going over a waterfall. I don't know. This is kind of horrific, but I don't know what's happening there. That could be my son Ingo, not sure. This is odd. There's a bird, a window, someone playing cards at a table. I'm not sure. A dog. No idea. No idea what this means. But it was kind of fun to do, I guess. This is our dear cat who passed away, Artemis. Anyway, forget the dreams. I got back to drawing what I was looking at, view from LaGuardia. Then I started going the opposite direction. I started going to sketch night at the Society of Illustrators, and actually painting real people. This is my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law, John, in Michigan. This is our son, Ingo. This is Leidy clipping her nails. Then I thought, well, I'll experiment with size and see what happens if I make really tiny ones. And that's a tiny one. That's a tiny one. This is our cat, Apollo. Then we started walking, Leidy and I. When Ingo went to art school, Leidy and I started walking in the city more, and whenever we traveled, and I got back to return to painting maps. We decided to walk the length of Bergen Street in Brooklyn, which is a lovely street and does relate apparently to Bergen in Norway. And this was a good walk, but there's always stop for coffee, Leidy drinking coffee on the walk. This one I will linger over for a moment because it's a pretty good walk. The caption is Bronx on home, 8 hours, 11 miles, the zoo, a pizza, 3 oysters, 2 calzones, a hospital, 5 projects, coffee at Filtered, and a giant python with Leidy. So that, if you know New York City, this is upside down because the Bronx is at the bottom there. Leidy stayed at the Allerton branch. I went to the zoo. Then we went to Arthur Avenue, which is Little Italy of the Bronx. Then we walked down Bathgate Street, which takes you past the Morris houses, the Melrose houses, the Claremont houses, the Mitchell houses, to Piano Town, which is where all the pianos used to be made in the Bronx, had coffee there, went over the 3rd Avenue Bridge, past All Saints Church, over Columbia, and home. That was a lovely day. This is our friend's garden. And while I put this in to show something I learned from my son who went to Cal Arts, and all of the young Cal Artsians, Cal Art artists would be drawing on Post-it notes, which is a lovely thing to do. And you can even paint on Post-it notes. There's Artemis. No, that's not Artemis. That's Apollo. Leidy reads the paper. And this is a bad picture. This is from our first trip to Peaks Island, as a matter of fact. Peaks Island, Ingo gets older. All right, I'll just start moving through these. New York, Huntington, out my mother's window. Apollo looks out the window in New York. Leidy does embroidery. And now, just in the past couple of years, we've been traveling again, the two of us. This is from a trip to Sweden. My dear friend Vladimir Radonsky, who lived in Rome, just passed away. This was the beautiful hospital he was in. He was very proud of the Renaissance courtyards in his very own hospital. This is where he passed away. This is Pennsylvania. This is my mother's Amish friend, my mother. Ingo getting older. Leidy. My mother broke her ankle. And Paris, Pennsylvania, gray. New York, Ingo sleeping on the subway. Leidy making coffee at her sister's. Riverside Park, Leidy drawing. A giant pig in Hattiesburg. And finally, not quite finally, but last thing I've been doing is illustrating, again, sort of trying to do the memory thing. I've been illustrating my favorite moments of the books I'm reading, the adult books. So this is a book by Marjorie Sharp, The Foolish Gentlewoman. For Simon was profoundly convinced that all people became a nuisance sooner or later. That has been kind of a lovely travel journaling because it is completely imaginary. And these are the two Amish sisters on the train that I saw two times ago when I went to my mother's. And this again is, you can't just stand and draw the Amish girls, you have to get a glimpse of them, sit down again, and paint them. My mother, she doesn't sit for me either. I glimpse her, and then I paint her. Leidy on the subway, our house. So this is what the journals look like. I have about 100. And this is what they look like individually. So now we're to materials in my talk. Yes, good. We're to materials. Sometimes they're big. Sometimes they're store-bought. This is moleskin watercolor. And if you go to a nice stationery store, you'll see these wonderful sketchbooks. Some are simple paper. If you get the watercolor paper, you'll get nice heavy paper. This is a wonderfully beautiful sketchbook by Pentalic, which I didn't know at all, and I don't often see those. I also make my own. which is pretty easily done, and you can use your scrap paper. Sometimes I just make portfolios of loose paper. This is a fantastic book, the book that I've always used to make my own sketchbooks and portfolios. This is another one I just got. It's published by the Shanghai Museum of Art. Probably this book is hard to find. I bought it at the Printed Matter Book Fest in New York City. These are some of my materials. I like to use brush pens, which are those in the middle, pencils or regular brushes. Essential, I think, to travel journaling is to have a good pen case. And I've never liked the ones that I could find, so I finally made my own out of a Chinese bag. Here is a typical watercolor paint box, and they can be expensive, but they are worth it. Here I am at the new studio this morning, in action before the chainsaws arrived. Here's Leidy swimming this morning in action. Very impressive. I did not go in. Here's Rufio, the dog of the chainsawers, who came into the studio. Here are my tips for success. Draw what you want to remember. For instance, the counties of Michigan. Draw what you might use. For instance, the giant dog named Rufio, or a pig named Kevin. Give yourself a limited amount of time, which I think is good. And if you don't have friends that keep you moving, you can set a timer, which I often do on my phone. I give myself 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then you have to stop. The other thing is to finish your drawings later. The next morning, at night, or even 10 years from now. It's a lovely thing to do, I think. Draw from memory, drawing your father or your bedroom. Draw on cheap material like Post-its, or paint on expensive material like moleskin books. Paint right up to the edge, or paint in a box. And finally, remember that this talk, notwithstanding, really the journals are for yourself, and you don't have to show them to anybody. Just like Mr. Turner showed them to almost no one. But finally, my answer, this is my answer, which I've come to, of why to keep a travel journal, is this. The simple act of sitting or standing before a landscape, a person or a flower, or even another painting, because it involves time, it takes time, leads you out of everyday time and into a kind of unending time, which you may re-enter whenever you care to. All you need to do is open your sketchbook. Thank you. We have 5 minutes for questions, if anyone has questions about where to buy your favorite brush pen, for instance. Otherwise, I'm going to sign books for anyone who wants books to be signed. I can tell you the best place to buy your art materials in New York is no longer exists. That was New York Central. The best place to buy paints is in Paris, because they're about half as expensive than in the United States for some reason. But that's my good advice. Paul? Yes. I studied biology, but I would get my biology courses done and then race off to the art department, because there was always a drawer and a painter. So I did study it but I always never thought it would be what I would do. Then, in fact, I was headed to medical school. Lighty and I went into the Peace Corps. That's when we both started painting seriously, and we started selling paintings, so that when I got back there was the first day of medical school, I called them and said I wasn't coming. And so that's my story. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you all for coming, and it's lovely to be in Maine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Everybody, I want you to know that Ari from Longfellow Books is right outside the door here. He has books for sale, and Chris will be signing them right outside right after this. So thank you once again. Thanks for coming. Thank you very much. One more round of applause for Chris.